On June 24, 2026, the basketball world watched something that changed everything. Caitlin Clark was on the floor at Gainbridge Fieldhouse in Indianapolis, scrambling for a loose ball against the Phoenix Mercury, when Alyssa Thomas drove her fist directly into Clark's throat. Not during a play, not going for the ball was already gone. Thomas kneed Clark in the groin, punched her in the neck, and then stepped right over her like she wasn't even there. A referee was standing on the baseline, watching the entire thing unfold, and didn't blow the whistle. Not a single call. And what happened after that game didn't just expose one dirty play. It ripped open a conversation that the WNBA had been trying to avoid for 3 straight seasons. Because this isn't just about Caitlin Clark getting fouled anymore. This is about a league that can't decide whether to protect its most valuable player or punish her for being too popular. And what you're about to hear involves a Nike deal worth $28 million that went horribly wrong, a coaching controversy that nearly tore the Indiana Fever apart from the inside, record-breaking numbers that nobody in league history has ever touched, and a question that the entire basketball world is now being forced to answer. Can the WNBA survive its own success? But before we get into all of that, you need to understand what really happened during that Mercury game, because the footage tells a story that goes way beyond what most people saw on the highlights. The Fever and Mercury had already played each other 2 days earlier on June 22nd, and that game was a war zone, 6 technical fouls and 1 ejection. Clark picked up her 5th technical of the season during that contest, and the team petitioned the league to have it rescinded. The WNBA said no. So by the time these two teams met again on June 24th, tensions were already through the roof. Clark came out firing anyway. She had 19 points and 8 assists in just 20 minutes of play, shooting 5 of 9 from the field and 3 of 4 from 3. She was cooking, and the Mercury had no answer for her on the offensive end. Then came the play that lit the entire internet on fire. Clark went to the floor during a scramble for a loose ball. Alyssa Thomas was right there, and what happened next wasn't basketball. Thomas's fist connected with Clark's throat while Clark was lying on the ground. Then Thomas got up, stepped right over her, and jogged back down the court. No whistle, no call, no review, nothing. Fever head coach Stephanie White was furious. After the game, she didn't hold back one bit. She called the play egregious and said the fact that it was a no call was absolutely unacceptable. She pointed out that there was a referee standing right there and watching the whole thing happen. She said they've got to be better. But it wasn't over. Later in the second quarter, Clark was fouled while shooting a 3-pointer. She hit the ground hard and was seen grabbing her back as she got up. Another defender undercut her on a separate 3-point attempt. Clark eventually left the game during the third quarter with a back injury and didn't return. The Mercury won 111-109. And then, as if the game itself wasn't bad enough, the Mercury's official social media account posted a cartoonish stick figure drawing celebrating their win. It showed DeWanna Bonner lying on the floor with a speech bubble that read, "Do you want a piece of this?" Fans absolutely lost it. Thousands of comments poured in calling the post tasteless, tone-deaf, and a direct dig at Clark, who had just been assaulted on the court and left with an injury. The timing couldn't have been worse. The next day, the WNBA finally stepped in. They upgraded the play to a flagrant foul 2 and suspended Alyssa Thomas for 1 game, slapping her with a $1,000 fine for, and this is the league's exact language, recklessly making contact with her fist to the throat area of Caitlin Clark. The Fever's team president, Kelly Krauskopf, released a statement saying that player safety should be paramount in their league and that they appreciated the review and action taken. But the response from the other side was just as heated, and that's where things got even more complicated.
Phoenix Mercury head coach Nate Tibbetts held a press conference before his team's next game and went on an almost 3-minute rant defending Thomas. He started by saying the Mercury organization wanted Alyssa Thomas to know she was 100% supported. He called her one of the toughest players in the game and said she was absolutely not cheap. He took a shot at the entire process, saying the suspension wasn't based on a thorough investigation and claiming the league relied on social media screenshots to make their decision. He even went as far as saying that he was part of the referee task force and that relying on social media was a slippery slope. But here's the part that most people don't talk about when it comes to Alyssa Thomas, and it adds a layer to this story that makes it even more complicated. Thomas has permanent ligament tears in both of her shoulders. She played through them for years, and the grueling schedule of playing in the WNBA and then immediately going overseas during the offseason left her no time for surgery. Her partner, Dewana Bonner, had a brief and controversial stint with the Indiana Fever in 2025 before asking for a trade, getting waived, and eventually signing with Phoenix to play alongside Thomas. So there's a personal dimension to the rivalry between these two teams that goes deeper than any single play. And what made the whole situation even more explosive was a piece published by the Ringer just days after the incident. The headline was straightforward but devastating. It read, "The WNBA's problem isn't Caitlin Clark, it's trust." The article argued that the Thomas suspension didn't solve the league's problem, it exposed it. The real issue wasn't one dirty foul, it was a league that had spent years wishing away its controversies instead of addressing them head-on. The WNBA had a trust problem, and every time something like this happened, it got worse. But what most fans didn't realize was that the Alyssa Thomas incident was only the latest chapter in a season that had already been filled with chaos for Caitlin Clark. And the drama that nearly broke the Fever came from a place nobody expected, inside their own locker room. About a month before the Thomas play, the Indiana Fever were sitting at 4-4, and fans were already sounding the alarm. They'd just been blown out 100-84 by the Portland Fire, one of the two brand-new expansion teams in the league, and the loss wasn't even the biggest story. It was what happened on the sideline during the game that sent shockwaves through the entire WNBA fanbase. Head coach Stephanie White pulled Caitlin Clark, Aaliyah Boston, and Lexi Hall from the game at the 3-minute and 32-second mark of the first quarter. Indiana was up 8-2 at the time. The moment those three left the floor, the game fell apart. Portland went on a 19-4 run and the Fever never recovered. Data later showed that this was the earliest Clark had been subbed out all season, contradicting White's post-game claim that she was following her typical substitution pattern. But the real firestorm started when a video surfaced on social media. During a timeout in the second quarter, cameras caught White standing over Clark, jabbing her finger in the air in Clark's direction while speaking to her. Clark stretched her arms out to the sides and raised them in what looked like a defensive stance, as if she was mimicking what she was being told to do. Then White called over rookie Raven Johnson to take Clark's place. Clark stood up, walked behind the coach, and shook her head. The frustration was obvious. The clip went viral instantly. Some fans accused White of deliberately sabotaging Clark. Others claimed the video was AI-generated because of a blue object near the end that looked strange. Analysis later showed it was just Clark's bench seat pad, and the video was authentic. Analyst Jason Whitlock went as far as posting on social media that White and her defensive assistant Breon January had intentionally sabotaged Clark. He pointed to the data showing the unusually early substitution and said that in the history of basketball, no superstar player had ever been subbed out after just 210 seconds of excellent playmaking. Clark finished the game with just 6 points on 1-for-7 shooting in 22 minutes. It was one of the worst performances of her young career.
2 days later, both Clark and White addressed the situation. And this is where Caitlin Clark showed why she's built differently. Instead of throwing her coach under the bus or feeding the drama, she shut it down with one of the most powerful statements any player has given this season. She said she rides for Steph, she rides for these girls. She said nobody on the team thought twice about what happened, and that it was just another example of people wanting to blow things up and make something that's not reality. Then she got personal. She said that when she got hurt during a game at Connecticut last season, she bawled in Steph's arms. She called Stephanie White somebody she will ride for the rest of her life. She said the people who sit on their phones all day never see those moments. White backed it up from her end. She called it coaching. She said she was challenging a player, which is what coaching is. She then made a point that hit harder than most people gave her credit for. She said she didn't often think this kind of thing becomes an issue if you're watching it in men's sports. It was a subtle but sharp observation about the double standard applied to women's basketball. Every substitution gets dissected, every timeout gets judged, every sideline conversation gets turned into body language analysis and lip-reading content. Here's the thing, though. After all that noise, after all the conspiracy theories and hot takes and viral clips, the Indiana Fever went out and won 4 straight games. Clark's scoring efficiency shot up, the team started clicking, and when the Thomas incident happened a few weeks later, it was Stephanie White who stood up louder than anyone to defend Clark. The same coach who fans wanted fired was now calling out the league for failing to protect her star player. She said the fist in the throat was crazy and dangerous. She said it was frustrating that it wasn't recognized in real time, but she was thankful the league went back and did their due diligence. She said the biggest issue was consistency, not just in how games were officiated, but in how specific players were officiated, and specifically how Caitlin was officiated. The relationship between Clark and White didn't just survive the controversy, it got stronger, and that might be the most underrated storyline of the 2026 WNBA season. But while the drama was swirling around her, Clark was doing something on the court that nobody in league history had ever done before, and the numbers she was putting up were absolutely absurd. Through her first 13 games of the 2026 season, Caitlin Clark had racked up 265 points and 108 assists. That made her the fastest player in WNBA history to reach 250 points and 100 assists in a single season, beating the previous record by 3 full games. Let that sink in for a second. She didn't just break the record, she shattered it by a margin that shouldn't even be possible for a player in her 3rd season. Her averages tell an even bigger story. Clark was averaging 21.2 points per game on 43% shooting from the field, along with 8.2 assists and 4 rebounds per contest. Her 21.2 points per game marked a career high, and her assist numbers continued to rank among the best in the entire league. Through the 2026 season, she'd crossed the 1,379 career point mark in just 72 games with the Fever. She'd already been named a 2-time All-Star, earned an All-NBA First-Team selection, and won the 2024 Rookie of the Year award. She was also surging to the top of All-Star voting alongside teammate Aaliyah Boston, and she just picked up her 4th Career Player of the Week award, tying her with Katie Douglas and Kelsey Mitchell, and trailing only the legendary Tamika Catchings in franchise history. And keep in mind, this wasn't a healthy, uninterrupted climb to the top. In 2025, Clark's sophomore season was derailed by quadriceps and groin injuries that limited her to just 13 appearances. She managed 214 points at 16.5 per game during those limited outings, but it was a frustrating year. Despite playing barely a third of the season, fans still voted her an All-Star captain after she collected a record 1,293,526 fan votes. Nobody in league history had ever received that many. Even injured and sidelined, she was still the most popular player in the sport. Coming into 2026, there were real questions about whether Clark could bounce back to full health and recapture the magic from her rookie year. She answered those questions in the most emphatic way possible. Not only did she return to form, she elevated her game to an entirely new level. She was scoring more, shooting more efficiently, and making her teammates better at a rate that the league simply hadn't seen before from a player this young.
The Fever as a team reflected that growth. They were 11-8, sitting 3rd in the Eastern Conference and leading the entire WNBA in scoring at 93.9 points per game. Their offensive rating was 2nd in the league. Clark was the engine that made all of it work. In one standout week, she scored a cumulative 76 points, the most by any player in the Eastern Conference that week, and the 2nd most in the entire league. She added 20 assists and 13 rebounds across those games. The Fever weren't just competitive, they were dangerous, and Clark was the reason.
She also made her senior international debut for Team USA at the FIBA Women's World Cup qualifying tournament in Puerto Rico in March 2026, a moment that represented another milestone in a career that was starting to collect them at an unprecedented pace. She'd been notably absent from the USA squad that won the Olympic gold medal at Paris 2024, a decision that drew significant criticism at the time. Her inclusion in 2026 felt both a correction and a validation of what everyone already knew. She was simply too good to leave off any roster. But for all the records and accolades, there was one thing that kept following Clark everywhere she went, and it had nothing to do with basketball. It was the constant, unrelenting physicality that opponents threw at her every single night, and the numbers on that front were just as startling. Over a 4-game stretch in mid-2026, Caitlin Clark defended 34 isolation possessions. That was the most by any player over a 4-game span in the past 3 seasons. Teams weren't just being physical with her, they were specifically scheming to attack her defensively, running their best scorers at her in one-on-one situations to wear her down and try to take her out of the game. It was a deliberate, calculated strategy, and it was happening on a nightly basis. This wasn't a new development. It had been building since her rookie year. During the 2024 season, players from multiple teams were caught on camera delivering hard fouls that went far beyond normal competitive play. Marina Mabrey, then playing for the Connecticut Sun, received a technical foul in a game against Indiana that the league later upgraded to a flagrant 2. It established a pattern that would only intensify in the years that followed. By 2026, Clark had racked up 5 technical fouls of her own, at least one of which the favor felt was unjustified enough to petition the league for a rescission. The league denied it. Stephanie White consistently framed the issue around consistency. She didn't ask for special treatment for Clark, she asked for equal treatment. She said repeatedly that her message was always the same. They needed consistency, not just in how a game is officiated, but in how players are officiated, and specifically how Caitlin is officiated. She used the word disappointed when describing her feelings about the way things were being handled. After the Thomas incident, she went further, saying that when these things continue to happen time and time again, eventually it gets frustrating. Clark herself took a different approach when asked about the physicality. In a moment that surprised a lot of people, she addressed the racial dynamics that surrounded her treatment. She acknowledged the privilege that comes with being a white player in the WNBA, and said she didn't believe she was being targeted because of her race. It was a mature and nuanced response from a 24-year-old who could have easily taken the bait and fueled an already divisive debate. Instead, she redirected the conversation back to basketball and away from the culture wars that social media desperately wanted her to engage in. The broader media landscape around Clark had become its own ecosystem by this point. Fox Sports analysts were calling out double standards. ESPN commentators were debating whether there was, in one host's words, a flagrant level of resentment toward Clark in the league. The Ringer was publishing long-form pieces arguing that the real problem was a breakdown of institutional trust. And on social media, every single play involving Clark was being dissected, slow-motioned, screen-grabbed, and debated by millions of people within minutes. It was exhausting, and yet Clark kept showing up, kept competing, and kept putting up numbers that nobody could argue with. She wasn't trying to win a war of words, she was trying to win basketball games. And she was doing it while dealing with the level of scrutiny, physicality, and media pressure that no player in WNBA history had ever faced. But if the on-court battles and coaching drama defined the first half of Clark's 2026 season, what happened off the court might end up defining her entire legacy, because the biggest company in sports nearly fumbled the opportunity of a generation, and the man who built Nike's entire empire around Michael Jordan had some devastating words about how badly they messed it up.
In April of 2024, Caitlin Clark signed an 8-year, $28 million endorsement deal with Nike.
At the time, it was the richest shoe deal any WNBA player had ever signed, and the expectation was that Nike would move fast. Clark was coming off the most watched women's college basketball game in history. Her name was bigger than the sport itself. The entire country knew who she was. It was the perfect moment to capitalize. Nike didn't capitalize. They waited and waited and kept waiting. For nearly 3.5 years after signing Clark, Nike had no signature shoe on the market. There was a Caitlin Clark colorway released in 2025, a light armory blue, white, and Baltic blue version of the Kobe 6 Pronto, and it became the most worn shoe by NBA players during the 2025-26 season. But it wasn't her shoe. It was someone else's design with her colors on it. Meanwhile, Clark's off-court business was booming without Nike's help. She was moving products for Gatorade, Panini America, Stanley, and Wilson Sporting Goods. Wilson specifically called her product launch the most successful in basketball since Michael Jordan. Gatorade towels, Wilson balls, Stanley tumblers, everybody was cashing in on Caitlin Clark, except the company that had paid $28 million for exclusive access to her feet. Then Sonny Vaccaro stepped into the conversation and dropped a bomb. Vaccaro is 86 years old, he's retired, and he's the single most important figure in the history of sneaker endorsements because he's the man who signed Michael Jordan to Nike in 1984. That one decision built the Jordan brand, transformed Nike from a running shoe company into the most powerful sports brand on earth, and changed professional sports marketing forever. So when Vaccaro says something about the sneaker business, people listen. He told ESPN's Dan Wetzel that Nike's handling of Clark was one of the biggest failures he had ever seen. He said Clark was bigger than Jordan in some ways because she was already a known commodity when she entered the WNBA. The public had grabbed onto her like no one else. She was more than just a basketball player, and it made no sense that Nike hadn't moved faster. He compared the situation to LeBron James, who got his first Nike signature shoe by Christmas of his rookie season, just 7 months after Nike won the bidding war for the high school phenom. Clark had been waiting years. Sources inside Nike told ESPN that the company had simply gotten complacent. The new CEO, Elliott Hill, had launched a win-now strategy to streamline decision-making and turn the company around, but the damage was already done. Critics pointed out that Nike and its Jordan brand had 8 NBA signature shoes, but just 2 in the WNBA. Some of the NBA players with signature deals, like Devin Booker and Cade Cunningham, were all-stars, sure, but they didn't have anything close to Clark's cultural reach or commercial power. Finally, on June 17, 2026, the wait ended. Nike Basketball posted a teaser on social media with 4 words, "Coming to a logo near you." And just like that, the Caitlin 1 was official. Clark had been building up to the announcement all week with a masterclass in modern athlete marketing. She changed her Instagram handle to @Caitlin1. She updated her profile picture to close-up shots of the shoe, revealing little details like the double C logo and the number 22 on the exterior. She showed up to a game against the Toronto Tempo in a vintage Alexander McQueen pantsuit, wearing friendship bracelets that read Caitlin 1 and 10/01/26, teasing the October 1st release date. Every single detail was calculated, and every single one went viral. The shoe itself was a statement. Nike built it around 3 core principles that Clark specifically requested: speed, range, and unpredictability. Those aren't just marketing buzzwords, they describe exactly how she plays. The Caitlin 1 introduced Nike Opticast technology, a construction of cast polyurethane nodes at varying heights designed to reduce drag and enhance movement efficiency. Nike had never used this technology in a basketball shoe before. Clark herself had said on the New Heights podcast with the Kelsey brothers that the technology in her shoe wasn't anything Nike had ever put into a basketball shoe. A Cushlon midsole paired with an articulated 4-foot Air Zoom turbo unit provided close-to-foot responsiveness and faster feedback, tuned specifically for pull-up jumpers, step-backs, and the kind of sudden directional changes that make Clark so impossible to guard.
The visual language of the shoe drew inspiration from the ripple of the three-point arc, which was a perfect touch since Clark is known for launching threes from distances that only she and Steph Curry have ever made routine. The outsole contained hidden Easter eggs, personal mantras that Clark chose herself: shoot more threes, from anywhere, and the most telling one of all, it was never a long shot. You could only see them by flipping the shoe over, a small detail that Clark said she loved because it gave consumers something to discover.
The Caitlin 1 would retail at $140 in North America and $135 internationally, with a full family-size run including grade school and preschool sizes. An 18-piece apparel line launching alongside the shoe would include jackets, graphic hoodies, and performance tees. Clark talked about wanting the shoe to inspire the next generation. She said having her own shoe had been a dream for as long as she could remember. She mentioned growing up with her first pair of pink Jordans and her first pink Nike basketball shoes, and how she hoped that young boys and girls would put on the Caitlin 1 and dream about achieving whatever they wanted, whether that was basketball or anything else. She became the 5th active WNBA player to have a signature shoe with a major brand, joining Angel Reese with Reebok, Breanna Stewart with Puma, and Sabrina Ionescu and Aja Wilson with Nike. But none of those launches carried the weight that this one did. The Caitlin 1 wasn't just a shoe release, it was a cultural moment 3 years in the making, delayed by corporate indecision and finally delivered by a player who had outgrown the timeline her own sponsor had set for her. And the timing of the release couldn't have been more poetic, because while Nike was finally getting its act together, Clark was simultaneously dealing with the most physical stretch of basketball she'd ever played. The Alyssa Thomas incident happened just 1 week after the shoe announcement. Clark went from celebrating the biggest off-court moment of her career to lying on a court with a fist in her throat and a back injury that threatened to sideline her. The contrast between those two moments told the story of her entire 2026 season. Every peak came with a valley. Every celebration was followed by a challenge. And through all of it, she just kept going. But what makes Clark's journey so compelling isn't just what's happening to her. It's how deeply it mirrors the path of another player who changed basketball forever. And the comparisons aren't coming from random fans on social media. They're coming from the people closest to both of them. When Caitlin Clark was still at Iowa, her head coach, Lisa Bluder, did something that would shape the way Clark handled everything that was about to come. One night, Bluder's husband suggested she reread Sacred Hoops, the 1995 book by Phil Jackson that detailed his experience coaching Michael Jordan with the Chicago Bulls. Bluder had read it years earlier when she was coaching at Drake, but this time she approached it differently. She grabbed a yellow highlighter and started marking every passage that reminded her of Clark. There were a lot of them. Jackson wrote about the isolation that came with Jordan's celebrity, how his fame created barriers between him and his teammates, how it made leadership harder, how the pressure Jordan put on himself and the pressure the world put on him required a specific kind of mental framework to survive. Bluder saw all of those same dynamics playing out in Clark in real time. The jealousy from other players who felt overshadowed, the media attention that warped every interaction, the weight of being the singular face of a program and a sport. Bluder started sharing the highlighted passages with Clark directly. She'd pull out the book at team hotels on road trips and hand it over. "Read this part," she'd say, and Clark would read it. Not because she was told to, but because she saw herself in it. She understood the parallels. She felt the same isolation, the same pressure, the impossible expectations. And Jackson's words, filtered through Jordan's experience, gave her a framework for processing all of it. Bluder later told reporters that the things Michael Jordan dealt with, the things Phil Jackson had to help Michael navigate, were some of the same things she felt she had to help Caitlin with. She reminded Clark that great ones carry the heaviest burden. She told her to make sure she always talked about her teammates instead of herself. She told her that if she couldn't bring a teammate along physically, she could bring them along by the way she spoke about them. Those lessons stuck. You can hear them in every interview Clark gives. She deflects credit, she praises her teammates, she keeps the focus on the team even when the camera's only pointed at her. Jan Jensen, who took over as Iowa's head coach after Bluter retired, made the comparison even more explicit. At Big Ten Media Days, Jensen was asked about the program moving on after Clark, and she invoked Jordan by name. She said she thought Michael Jordan was still a part of North Carolina's identity, that they probably didn't go through a single recruiting process without someone mentioning that Jordan played there. She said she was proud that Clark's legacy at Iowa would carry the same weight. Clark had already had her number retired at Carver Highway Arena, a 15,400-seat venue that sold out for the next season more than a month before it started.
The Jordan comparisons extended beyond the emotional into the commercial. Wilson Sporting Goods directly compared Clark's impact to Jordan's when describing the success of her product launches. Sonny Vaccaro said she arrived in the WNBA as a bigger-known commodity than Jordan was when he entered the NBA. And Jensen's assistant coach at Iowa made the observation that only 2 people in the world were doing what Clark does on the court, referring to her absurd range and the way she launches threes from the logo. Her and Steph Curry, that's it. But the most important parallel between Clark and Jordan might be the most painful one. Both faced relentless physical targeting early in their careers from opponents who couldn't match their skill. Both had to develop the mental and physical toughness to absorb punishment and keep performing at the highest level. And both had to navigate the impossible paradox of being simultaneously the best thing that ever happened to their league and the person that league seemed least willing to protect. Jordan eventually silenced his doubters by winning 6 championships. Clark's story is still being written, but the early chapters are starting to look remarkably familiar. The 2026 WNBA season is only about a third of the way through, and already it feels like a turning point for the entire league. The expansion to 15 teams with the addition of the Portland Fire and Toronto Tempo has brought new markets, new revenue, and new attention. Television ratings continue to climb, arenas are selling out, social media engagement around the WNBA is at an all-time high, and Caitlin Clark is at the center of all of it, whether she wants to be or not. The Fever are sitting at 11-18, third in the Eastern Conference, with a realistic path to the playoffs and potentially a deep run if Clark stays healthy. Her back injury from the Mercury game has been a recurring issue throughout the season, but she's played through it more often than she's sat out. Her next game is July 5th against the Las Vegas Aces, a matchup that will test Indiana against one of the league's perennial powerhouses, and Asia Wilson, arguably the only other player in the league who can match Clark's impact on a game. But the bigger story isn't about any single game or any single matchup. It's about what the WNBA chooses to do with the opportunity it's been given. Caitlin Clark has brought more eyeballs, more money, and more cultural relevance to women's basketball than any player in history. The numbers aren't debatable, the attention isn't debatable, the growth isn't debatable. What is debatable is whether the league has the institutional capacity to manage all of it. The Alyssa Thomas suspension was the right call, but it came a day late. The Mercury's social media post mocking Clark after her injury showed a franchise-level lack of judgment. The officiating inconsistencies that Stephanie White has called out repeatedly suggest a league that hasn't standardized how it protects its biggest names. And the broader cultural wars that surround Clark, the racial dynamics, the gender politics, the social media tribalism, all of it is happening faster than the league's communication and policy infrastructure can handle. Clark herself seems to understand this better than most. She's not asking for special treatment. She's not playing the victim. She's averaging 21 points and 8 assists a game and letting her game do the talking. When she addresses the controversies, she does it with a maturity that belies her age. She deflects the culture war narratives. She defends her coach. She acknowledges her privilege. She focuses on basketball. She does all of this while being the most scrutinized, most targeted, and most physically punished player in the league. And she does it while wearing a shoe that Nike waited 3.5 years too long to make. A shoe with a mantra hidden on the bottom that reads, "It was never a long shot." Maybe for Clark, it wasn't. Maybe she always knew this was where she'd end up, at the intersection of talent and controversy and history, carrying a league on her shoulders the same way Jordan carried the NBA in the 1980s and 90s. Maybe the long shot was thinking anyone could stop her. The Caitlin 1 drops October 1st. The WNBA season stretches into September. Between now and then, there will be more record-breaking performances, there will be more hard fouls, there will be more viral moments in social media firestorms and conversations about what this league owes its biggest star. Caitlin Clark will keep showing up, keep scoring, and keep proving that she belongs at the very top of the sport. The only real question left is whether the WNBA will rise to meet the moment she's creating. Because right now, the league's most valuable player is also its most vulnerable one, and the window to get this right isn't going to stay open forever. So, what do you think? Is the WNBA doing enough to protect Caitlin Clark, or is the league failing its biggest star at the worst possible time? Drop your take in the comments. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one, because this story is far from over, and whatever happens next could reshape women's basketball for the next decade.